It's a typical, bustling day in a small suburban town. Cars zip down the highway, commuters rushing to work, families heading to school, and trucks laden with goods. But today, something strange happens that no one can explain. As the traffic flows smoothly, suddenly, a large dog appears in the middle of the busy road, blocking the way of every single vehicle. It doesn't bark, doesn't move, and most unsettlingly, doesn't seem afraid of the speeding cars just inches away. At first, drivers think it's a random, harmless sighting. They honk their horns, attempt to maneuver around the dog, but the creature remains still, resolute, almost as if it's guarding the path ahead. The confusion turns to frustration, and soon, an uneasy tension builds. What could this dog possibly want? Why is it blocking the road? It's only when one driver takes a closer look and decides to follow the dog that the real story begins to unfold. As they follow the dog down a narrow, deserted street, they soon realize that this is no ordinary animal. It's leading them somewhere, guiding them into an unknown part of town that no one dares to visit, where dark secrets lie buried beneath the surface. What the dog uncovers will leave everyone who witnesses it in shock. But why this dog? Why today? And what exactly does it want to show? You'll want to stay tuned to the end, as what happens next will not only leave you stunned but make you question everything you thought you knew about the town, the dog, and the strange, dark truths hidden in plain sight. This is a story about more than just a stray dog. It's about the things we ignore, the dangers we overlook, and the truth that's often right in front of us, but only visible to those brave enough to see. Buckle up. This is going to be a ride you'll never forget. The air is thick with an unsettling stillness as the afternoon sun dips lower, casting long, distorted shadows across the empty streets. The usual hum of suburban life, distant chatter, the soft buzz of lawnmowers, the occasional car driving by, has been replaced by an eerie quiet. It's as if the world has momentarily held its breath. The road that was once bustling with life now feels abandoned, even though it's still teeming with cars. The dog stands motionless, its fur bristling slightly in the warm breeze, its eyes fixed on the horizon as if it's waiting for something only it knows. The drivers, frustrated and confused, hesitate for a moment, unsure whether to call animal control, to honk again, or simply wait for it to move on. But the longer they stare at the dog, the more they feel a sense of unease creeping up their spines. There's an inexplicable weight in the air, a feeling that something isn't quite right. The dog doesn't belong here, not in this moment, not in this place. For Sarah, sitting in her car a few yards away, her fingers grip the steering wheel tighter. She's late for an important meeting, but something about this situation feels off. The way the dog's eyes seem to follow her every movement sends shivers down her spine. She tries to dismiss it, blaming her nerves on the traffic, but she can't shake the feeling that this is more than just an animal in the road. The car behind her honks loudly, snapping her back to reality. She shifts into gear, but as she glances back at the dog, she notices it move, slowly, deliberately, off the road. A subtle, almost imperceptible motion, but it's enough to catch her attention. The dog starts walking down a side street, its tail swaying slightly. The air seems to thicken, the world holding its breath once again, as Sarah hesitates. It's as if the dog is beckoning her. With each step, the unsettling sense that something is about to unfold intensifies. Something hidden, something that's been waiting for a long time. She can't help herself, she follows. Something in her gut tells her that following the dog is the only option, that it will lead her to something far beyond her understanding, something that has been waiting to be discovered. The tension mounts, and as the dog vanishes into the narrowing streets, Sarah's heart pounds, and the fear begins to sink in. What's on the other side of this road? What's waiting? Sarah Mitchell is not a person who's easily rattled. In her early 30s, she's the kind of woman who thrives on order and logic, someone who relies on her organizational skills and determination to keep the world around her running smoothly. As an up-and-coming executive at a small but ambitious tech company, she's been working tirelessly for the past few years to climb the corporate ladder. A once promising career path in finance had shifted to tech, a decision made with the hope of challenging herself, but also to move away from her mundane and predictable life. She's a creature of habit, often waking up at 5:30 a.m., preparing her breakfast, then heading to the gym before work. She follows the same routine every day, nothing extravagant, but enough to give her a sense of control. Her life is meticulously planned, from her workday calendar down to the 5-minute intervals between meetings. But lately, she's been feeling like the grip on that order is slipping. The once unwavering confidence that carried her through work has begun to erode, replaced by an undercurrent of anxiety that she can't seem to shake. The small, strange occurrences, missed calls, vague emails, and most recently, recurring nightmares, are starting to seep into her waking life, casting long shadows over her daily routine. Today, however, is different. Today, Sarah is late, a minor but growing irritation, one of many signs that her life is beginning to feel slightly out of sync. As she sits behind the wheel of her car, stuck in yet another frustrating traffic jam, she feels a sense of dread creep over her. She tries to push the feelings away. It's just a dog, she tells herself, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. It's just a dog in the middle of the road. This isn't anything, but it doesn't feel that way. Not anymore. Sarah's thoughts are interrupted as a man pulls up beside her car. He's in his late 40s, his face flushed with irritation. His eyes meet hers as he rolls down his window. "Do you know what the hell is going on?" he demands, his voice tight with frustration. "I don't know," Sarah replies, her voice soft and uncertain. "I've been sitting here for a while now. That dog won't move." The man scoffs, muttering something under his breath before speeding off down the road. Sarah watches him leave, feeling a wave of unease wash over her again. She looks back at the dog. It hasn't moved an inch. Instead, it stands there watching her. For a fleeting moment, it feels as if the world has stopped moving altogether. Everything around her is still, suspended in time. Her phone buzzes, breaking the silence. Sarah picks it up, glancing at the screen. It's a message from her boss. "We need you in the office ASAP. Got a client meeting in 15 minutes. You're gonna be late." The message hits her like a ton of bricks. She's already late for an important meeting, and now she's stuck here, in this odd standoff with a dog. Her hands begin to tremble, but she shakes it off. "Focus," she tells herself. "You can't let this distract you. You're stronger than this." But the nagging feeling doesn't go away. She looks back at the dog. It's not acting like an ordinary dog. It's not darting around nervously or barking at passing cars. Instead, it's standing perfectly still, its gaze unbroken, its eyes sharp and alert. It's as if it's waiting for something or someone. In the past, Sarah had prided herself on her level-headedness, her ability to navigate the chaos of her busy life. She had no time for nonsense, no patience for irrational fears. But today, something feels different. This dog, this seemingly ordinary creature, has triggered a sense of curiosity in her, one that she can't seem to ignore. It's as though it's beckoning her, urging her to take action. The dog's presence, the traffic that won't budge, the ticking clock, the nagging feeling in her chest. Everything begins to feel like one great, strange puzzle. And just for a moment, Sarah finds herself wondering, what if this isn't just about the dog? What if there's something more at play here? At the same time, Sarah's thoughts drift to her past. She's always been a survivor, someone who's fought to get ahead despite the odds. Growing up in a modest home, she learned from an early age that nothing came easily. Her parents, both teachers, instilled in her a strong work ethic and a belief that hard work would bring success. But that lesson had always been more about surviving rather than thriving. The pressure to succeed, both for herself and to honor her parents, had been a constant companion. But that drive, while it had served her well in the professional world, also kept her emotionally distant. She found herself constantly pushing people away, convinced that vulnerability would only hold her back. There had been relationships, of course, but they never lasted. Her ambition had always come first. Now, as she sat behind the wheel of her car, she felt a pang of regret, a whisper in the back of her mind telling her that she had missed something. But what? And how could she fix it now? Just as Sarah's thoughts begin to spiral, she notices the dog move. Slowly, it steps off the road and begins walking down a narrow alley, its tail swaying gently behind it. The tension in the air seems to dissipate, but the sense of mystery lingers. Without thinking, Sarah shifts the car into gear, a strange sense of compulsion driving her forward. She's never been one to follow a whim, but this feels like something she needs to do. There's a pull, something invisible but strong, urging her to follow the dog. Maybe it's just my imagination, Sarah mutters to herself, her voice trembling slightly as she begins to move forward. But deep down, she knows that this is far from ordinary. Something is about to unfold, something that will change her life forever. With a deep breath, she presses her foot on the gas pedal, moving forward, unsure of where this path will lead. All she knows is that the dog is waiting, and somehow she can't turn back now. Sarah's car crept slowly down the road, her eyes fixed on the dog ahead. It wasn't fast, just a leisurely pace that suggested it wasn't in a hurry, as if it knew exactly where it was going. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine as she glanced back at the cars that remained trapped behind her. Some drivers honked in frustration, others muttered under their breath, but none of them seemed to care that she was following a dog into an alley. Felt absurd, but something told Sarah that she had to follow. The alley was narrow, flanked by old, crumbling buildings that looked like they hadn't seen care in years. The dog, a scruffy-looking mutt with patches of fur missing, darted down the alley and disappeared around a corner. Sarah hesitated. There was a small, sickening feeling in her stomach. This felt wrong. This wasn't her usual behavior. She was someone who stuck to the rules, someone who rarely veered off course. But the more she tried to dismiss the pull, the stronger it became. She had to know. With a quick glance over her shoulder, she decided. "I'm going in," she muttered to herself, the words feeling both irrational and inevitable at the same time. She turned the wheel, maneuvering the car into the alley, its tires crunching on the gravel underfoot. The dog was nowhere to be seen. Sarah slowly eased the car forward, every instinct in her telling her to turn back. But something kept her moving forward, the tug at the back of her mind growing with each passing second. She had a vague sense that something was unfolding before her, something important, and if she didn't see it through, she would regret it. But still, the doubts lingered. What was she doing here? Was this a mistake? Suddenly, she saw it. A flicker of movement at the far end of the alley. The dog, now standing in front of a rusted door set into an old brick wall, was staring back at her. It had stopped. It wasn't just waiting for her. It was expecting her. Her heart pounded in her chest as the sound of the world seemed to quiet around her. The tension in the air thickened, her palms growing clammy as she stepped out of the car. "Okay, let's just get this over with," Sarah whispered, her voice strained. She reached for the door handle of the car and pulled it open. The cool air hit her face, filling her lungs with a sharp, metallic scent that seemed off somehow. The alley was dimly lit by the faint glow of streetlights far above. The silence was overwhelming. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stepped onto the cracked pavement, her shoes tapping softly with each cautious step toward the dog. "What is it?" she muttered to herself, but the dog just stared at her, its eyes unnervingly calm, its posture alert. She reached the door and stood there, the metallic stench growing stronger with every breath. Something inside her stirred. Curiosity, fear, confusion. Yet she felt strangely compelled to act. The dog, still silent, sat at her feet and looked up at her as if it were waiting for her next move. Swallowing hard, Sarah reached for the door handle. It was cold, almost unnaturally so. Her fingers brushed the rusted metal, and a sudden jolt of unease ran through her, but she twisted the handle and pushed the door open. The creak of the hinges seemed louder than it should have been, echoing off the stone walls around her. She stepped inside, her heart racing as the dog trotted in behind her. Inside was a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves stacked high with old books and various objects, most of them covered in dust. The air was musty, thick with the weight of time and neglect. A small, flickering lamp on a rickety table cast strange shadows on the walls. But what caught Sarah's attention immediately was the figure standing in the center of the room. A man. He was tall and gaunt, his face pale, with deep-set eyes that glimmered in the dim light. His clothes were old, torn at the edges, as though they had been worn for years without care. But it wasn't his appearance that sent a cold shiver through Sarah's bones. It was the way he was staring at her. His gaze was intense, almost as if he had been waiting for her. There was a hint of something, perhaps recognition, perhaps something darker, in his eyes. Who are you?" Sarah's voice barely above a whisper. The question felt like it should have been directed at the dog. But the man spoke first. "You've come," he said in a hoarse, gravelly voice. It wasn't a question, more like an acknowledgement of something that had been expected. Her pulse quickened. "I don't understand. What do you mean?" Sarah's body tensed, ready to flee, but her feet wouldn't move. Something in the air in this room made it impossible to break away. "You followed the dog," the man replied, his voice barely audible. "It was always supposed to be you." Sarah's mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. The dog? She had only followed it out of impulse, out of some strange, irrational curiosity. But it felt like more than just chance. The dog, now standing at her side, let out a low growl. The man turned his attention to it and nodded once. "The truth lies beyond this door. It always has." "Truth? What truth? What do you mean?" Sarah demanded, her voice growing more frantic. The room felt as if it were closing in on her. Her chest tightened, and for a brief moment, she wondered if she was hallucinating. She hadn't had time to process everything that was happening. But now the overwhelming sense of dread, of something waiting just beyond her understanding, was beginning to settle into her bones. The man's lips curled into a faint, almost amused smile. "What you seek is buried beneath you." He pointed to the floor, to the dusty wooden boards beneath their feet. Sarah looked down, her mind grasping for an explanation, but nothing made sense. Her heart raced, and her fingers began to tremble. Then, as if sensing her hesitation, the dog barked. Sharp, urgent, startling. It was as though the bark broke through the fog of confusion surrounding her. "You have to know the truth," the man said, stepping closer. "It's always been here, right beneath your feet. You just didn't know how to see it." In that moment, Sarah's rational mind fought against what was being said. She had to leave. She had to get out. But that pull, the feeling that something important was about to be revealed, kept her rooted to the spot. Taking a deep breath, Sarah knelt down and began to pull at the wooden boards beneath her. The dog watched, silent and motionless, as if it knew exactly what was coming next. She removed one board, then another, until the space beneath it was revealed, dark, deep, and filled with what looked like the remnants of a long-forgotten burial. There, lying beneath the dust and dirt, were old bones. Human bones. Sarah gasped, stepping back in horror. "What is this? What does this mean?" The man simply nodded, his gaze steady and cold. "This was your past, Sarah. You just didn't know it yet." The revelation hit Sarah like a freight train, crashing into her mind with the weight of a truth that could no longer be denied. Everything, the strange feelings, the inexplicable pull, the unsettling sense of familiarity, was all leading to this moment. She had uncovered something she was never meant to find. And now there was no going back. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, the blood rushing to her ears, drowning out everything else. The bones beneath the floorboards seemed to pulse with a life of their own, a rhythm that mirrored her own frantic heartbeat. She stepped back slowly, trembling, her mind struggling to process the unimaginable truth the man had just laid bare. The air in the room felt colder now, thicker. It wasn't just the chill of the basement. It was as though the atmosphere itself was shifting, warping into something darker, heavier. She could hear the soft scuttling of rats behind the walls, their claws scratching the stone like whispers in the dark, just out of sight. The dog remained motionless, its eyes fixed on her with an unervingly intelligent gaze, as if it understood more than it should. Sarah's eyes darted to the man. He had taken a step back, his arms crossed, watching her with that same cold, unfeeling expression. His silence spoke volumes, and Sarah couldn't bear it any longer. "Why are you doing this? What is all of this?" she demanded, her voice shaking with both fear and anger. The man didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered to the bones again, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw a hint of something, regret, perhaps, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Then he finally spoke, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "You were always meant to find this, Sarah. The dog guided you here for a reason." "A reason?" she whispered, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. "What reason?" The man stepped forward then, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "You've been searching your entire life for something, haven't you? A piece of yourself you've lost, forgotten. That's why you're here." The dog knew that. It always knows. Sarah's breathing quickened. Her thoughts were racing now, her mind flashing back to strange moments from her past. The childhood dreams where she was lost, running through a dark forest, calling out for someone, something, but never being able to find it. The inexplicable feeling she'd had as an adult that something was always just beyond her reach, that she was always waiting for a revelation, an answer. Now it was all falling into place, and it terrified her more than she could have ever imagined. She looked at the dog again, its eyes unwavering, its posture unchanged. It was no longer just a stray animal. It was a guide, a messenger, perhaps even something more. Something that had been with her for much longer than she realized. A strange shiver crawled up her spine, and she instinctively reached for the nearest object to steady herself. A small, rusted lamp sitting on a nearby table. Her hand brushed against it, and in that instant, a sudden, sharp sound echoed through the room. The lamp flickered, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness. The sudden shift in the atmosphere felt like the air had thickened, and the shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, as though the room itself was closing in around her. "Don't," the man's voice hissed, sharp and almost warning. But Sarah was already moving, her heart pounding harder now, louder. She fumbled around in the dark, reaching out, trying to find anything to anchor her in the suffocating blackness. The sound of her breath was loud in her ears, her hands trembling as they grazed over the cold, rough walls of the room. Every inch of her screamed to get out, but her feet were rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a sense of dread. The floor creaked. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. A shadow shifted behind her, a figure moving, but she couldn't see it. Just the faint sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate. Her pulse quickened as she whirled around, expecting the man to be there, but there was nothing. Only the dog, standing still in the darkness, its eyes glowing faintly. How could it see in this dark? Then the footsteps returned, closer this time. She felt them, as if the very air around her had shifted, pressing in on her, a weight she could barely comprehend. She couldn't breathe. The dog barked, sharp and sudden, the sound slicing through the heavy silence. Sarah's body tensed, every nerve screaming to escape. Her instincts were telling her to run, to flee, but her feet were frozen, her body locked in place. The tension in the room was unbearable, suffocating, the weight of it pushing down on her chest like an unseen hand. "You shouldn't be here," the man said again, his voice now an eerie whisper in the darkness. "You've seen too much." It was as if the words had triggered something. The air seemed to grow heavier, thicker with malice. A whisper floated past her ear, soft, almost imperceptible, but distinct. A voice, Sarah's own voice, saying something she couldn't quite make out. She spun around again, but there was no one there. Nothing but the shadows, the creeping darkness that seemed to reach toward her with unseen hands. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her mind spinning in a haze of confusion and fear. Had she imagined it? Was she losing her mind? But then she felt it, a presence behind her. Cold, distant, but unmistakable. She wasn't alone. She turned slowly, her hands shaking as she reached for the wall to steady herself. And then there it was. A shadow moved again, but it wasn't just a shadow. It was a figure, a woman, standing in the far corner of the room. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She didn't recognize her, but the woman's face. It was hauntingly familiar. The woman's lips curled into a soft, unsettling smile. Her eyes locked on Sarah's with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The room felt colder still, the oppressive weight of the darkness growing heavier as the figure stepped closer. Her every movement eerily smooth, unnatural even. "No," Sarah whispered, a chill of terror creeping through her body. "Who are you?" The woman said nothing. Instead, she gestured toward the dog, her eyes glinting in the dim light. Her smile widened, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Sarah thought she could hear the faintest of whispers, soft, like a song. But it wasn't a song of comfort. It was a song of warning. And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, the figure was gone. Sarah stood there, frozen, breathless, her mind a tangled mess of confusion and fear. The dog, as if sensing her panic, growled low and steady, its gaze never leaving her. It was the only sound in the room now, the growl of the dog, steady and unyielding. A cold sweat formed on Sarah's brow, and she realized that the deeper she went into this mystery, the further she was from safety. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, their whispers growing louder in her mind. What was it that she was meant to find here? Why had the dog led her to this place? And as Sarah stood there, the weight of the mystery pressing down on her, she couldn't shake the feeling that the truth, whatever it was just beyond her reach. But she had already crossed the line. There was no going back now. The air in the room felt like it had thickened to a point where every breath was a struggle, and Sarah's mind raced, desperate to make sense of what had just happened. She couldn't shake the image of the mysterious woman, her chilling smile, and the soft whispers that still echoed in her ears. But one thing was certain, the dog had led her here for a reason, and whatever truth this house held, it was one Sarah needed to uncover. Her heart was pounding as she took a tentative step forward, the floor creaking beneath her weight. The dog had stopped growling, but its posture was tense, its body rigid as it stood at attention, watching the dark corners of the room. Sarah followed its gaze, her eyes scanning the dimly lit space. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Every movement of the air felt like a warning. "Why did you bring me here?" she whispered to herself, though she wasn't sure if she was asking the dog or the house itself. She was no longer certain where the line between the living and the dead began. Her voice echoed in the silence, and the dog responded with a low, almost sorrowful whine. It was the first time she had heard it make such a sound, and it cut through her with an unexpected sadness. But there was no time to ponder the dog's strange behavior. Sarah knew she had come too far to turn back. She needed answers, and the only way forward was to face whatever lay ahead. With a deep breath, she moved toward the far corner of the room where the figure of the woman had disappeared. The air grew colder the closer she got, and an unsettling feeling washed over her as if the room itself were alive, watching, waiting. Sarah reached the spot where the woman had stood and crouched, her fingers brushing over the dusty floorboards. It was then she noticed something, a small indentation in the wood, a trapdoor hidden beneath the layers of grime and dirt. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment the truth would be revealed. Without thinking, she grabbed the edge of the trapdoor and pulled. The wood creaked, resisting at first, but with one final pull it gave way. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the door swung open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness below. The smell of damp earth and mildew wafted up, making her stomach churn, but she didn't hesitate. With the dog at her side, she descended. The further she went, the colder the air became. It was as though she were stepping into another world entirely, a place that had been forgotten by time itself. The narrow staircase twisted, its steps worn and uneven, and the silence was suffocating. The deeper they went, the more it felt like the walls themselves were closing in on her, as if the house were trying to swallow her whole. Finally, she reached the bottom of the stairs. Her eyes strained in the dim light, but there was nothing but shadow ahead. A stone wall blocked the way, and it looked like there was no escape. But then, as her eyes adjusted, she noticed a faint glimmer of light coming from a small crack in the wall. It wasn't much, just a sliver of light, barely noticeable, but it was enough to give her hope. She stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch the stone. The moment her fingers made contact, a faint rumble echoed through the room, and the crack widened. The wall shifted, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. Sarah hesitated, her heart thundering in her chest, but the dog stepped forward, pushing through the opening. Without another moment's hesitation, Sarah followed, stepping into the chamber. The air here was thick with the smell of decay, the scent of something long forgotten. Her eyes adjusted quickly, and the sight before her took her breath away. The chamber was vast, its walls lined with shelves that were stacked high with old, rotting books and faded photographs. But it was the center of the room that drew Sarah's attention. There, in the middle of the space, was an altar. It was old, carved from dark wood, and covered in dust and cobwebs. On top of it lay a single, yellowed piece of paper, a journal, its edges frayed and torn. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the journal, but as her fingers brushed against the surface, a low growl rumbled from the dog. It was a sound of warning, deep and primal, and for the first time Sarah felt a true sense of danger. She looked down at the journal, her breath hitching in her throat. The dog growled again, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She had to open it. She had to know. With a shaky breath, Sarah flipped open the cover. The pages were brittle, but the writing inside was legible. As she read, her blood ran cold. It was her story. The journal detailed her life in ways that only someone who had been watching her for years could know. It chronicled moments she had long forgotten, events from her childhood, her nightmares, her struggles, things no one else could possibly have known. The words on the page twisted her stomach, her mind reeling as she tried to make sense of it all. But the most chilling part came near the end. She will find the truth. She will remember who she was, and she will take her place in the darkness. The dog will guide her, and together they will unleash what was never meant to be. A cold, hollow laugh echoed in Sarah's mind as she read those final words. The dog, once a companion, was no longer just an innocent creature. It was her guide, her protector, but it was also something darker, something far more powerful than she had ever realized. And then, the ground beneath her feet trembled. The walls began to shake, the stone groaning as if something beneath it was awakening. The dog's eyes glowed with a fierce intensity, and Sarah could feel the very air around her hum with energy. The truth was clear now, there was no escaping it. She was part of something far greater than she had ever understood. And whatever it was, it had been waiting for her to find it. As the tremors grew stronger, Sarah turned to the dog, her breath coming in short gasps. "What is this? What have you brought me into?" The dog's gaze softened, almost lovingly, and for a brief moment, Sarah saw the creature for what it truly was. A messenger, a guide, not of this world, but of something darker, older. And then, as if responding to her, the altar cracked open. A flood of light poured out, blinding Sarah for a moment, but then the darkness rushed in. She saw it, an ancient power, a force long hidden, now free. Sarah stumbled backward, her heart racing, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She understood. The journey had been long, the revelations painful, but in the end, she had found her place. The dog, standing beside her, gave one final, knowing look before it turned and walked into the darkness. And Sarah, now fully aware of her destiny, followed. The room fell silent, save for the echo of her footsteps and the distant howl of the wind outside. And as Sarah descended into the unknown, the house, once a prison, became a gateway. The truth had been found. But the story, as they say, was just beginning. As the dust settled, and the road once blocked by a lone dog now lay quiet, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on everything she had just experienced. The fear, the confusion, the overwhelming sense of disbelief. It all felt like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare she was just waking up from. She never imagined that one simple act of a dog standing in the middle of the road would unravel a mystery so dark, so twisted, that it would forever alter her perception of the world around her. The journey had been harrowing, filled with unexpected turns and dangers. But through it all, Sarah had learned something she never anticipated. Sometimes, we are forced to face the unknown not because we're strong, but because we have no other choice. And in those moments, it's our courage, our will to keep pushing forward, that defines us. Looking back at the chilling events that unfolded, Sarah knew she had come out stronger, though forever changed. The questions left unanswered, the chilling discovery of the dark truth buried under that road, would stay with her. Would she ever truly understand why the dog led her there? Or what the significance of that buried secret was? She couldn't say. But one thing was certain. This experience had made her acutely aware of the thin veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary. For the first time in a long while, Sarah was awake to the strange forces that lurk in the world, hidden just beneath the surface of daily life. The fear that once gripped her had transformed into a somber understanding of the mysterious ways the world operates. And yet, the questions lingered. What else might be hidden, waiting to be discovered? Was the dog simply an agent of fate or something more? Something with a deeper connection to the secrets that lie within the heart of the earth? And as she continued on her path, how many more such mysteries would she come across? Would she ever find peace? Or would she be forever drawn into the murky depths of the unknown? As Sarah walked away, the image of the dog remained etched in her mind, a reminder of the strange ways the universe works, and how, sometimes, it's the smallest, most unexpected creatures that can lead us to the greatest truths. If you enjoyed this intense journey and want to uncover more chilling mysteries, don't forget to hit that like button. Share your thoughts or predictions about Sarah's story in the comments below. We love hearing your theories. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss out on future videos filled with suspense and jaw-dropping twists. Stay tuned, because you won't want to miss what's coming next. Join our growing community, where we explore the most thrilling, eerie, and mind-bending tales. Thank you for watching, and remember, the mystery doesn't end here. It's just the beginning.